just living the dream under this southern sky. It's where stories are born and legends never die.
Okay, this is Johnny Ponder. Welcome to Cheaha Legends Tales of Trails. Today my guest is my oldest, richest, should I say prettiest sister? You think I should?
Oh,
Okay.
now Rosemary's going to be watching.
Well,
this,
yeah,
so be
we
careful.
probably better be careful about that. Yeah.
And she's kind of cute as well.
Yeah. We got all the ugliness, me and
And I'm
Becky
not
did.
the oldest child. I'm the oldest girl.
Oldest girl.
Yeah, and he's a lot older than
Yeah,
me.
that's for sure. Okay, we're going to get started with her, and she's got a bunch of stories to kind of commemorate Mother's Day, being that it's coming up real quick, and she's got some stories about our mama, which, incidentally, let me say right now, we had the best mama in the world. Randy had a great mama, too, if not, I'm sure he'd argue with us about the best in the world.
She was awesome.
Yeah, and she could cook too, couldn't she, Randy? Well, Randy does pretty good. Of course, I wouldn't know. I'll never get any of his cake.
You come into Rosie's party, so he'll have stuff there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, Becky. You want to talk a little bit about Mama?
Well, as a lot of people know, and her students knew, Mother was from Nacogdoches, Texas. Now, the funny thing is that she taught us how to spell Nacogdoches when we were just little kids. When I was in the first grade, I knew how to spell Nacogdoches.
I still have to look it up.
Well, that's because you're old.
Yeah.
And so the way she ended up in Alabama was when Mother graduated from Stephen F. Austin College in Texas. She went to work as a school teacher in Leggett. And Leggett was about 50 miles out of Nacogdoches toward Houston. And when she would come home on Friday afternoons, she would ride the bus. Now, while she worked in Leggett, she had to live with the superintendent of education because young girls didn't live by themselves back then.
Yeah.
And so, and Papa would only let her go since she was working with, living there with the superintendent and his wife. So anyway, she got on the bus one Friday afternoon to come back to Nacogdoches for the weekend, and there were a bunch of soldiers on the bus, and one of them kind of took a liking to her and came up and sat next to her, and his name was Carl Ponder, and he was from Talladega, Alabama. Well, she was very shy, and I think it took a while for him to win her over, but he definitely did.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the rest of the story. Okay, thank you for coming.
Yeah, you may not want to hear the rest of it. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you some interesting stories about Mother. One thing was when she graduated from high school, and a lot of you students Mother students who will be listening to this, you may not have known this, but she didn't want to be a teacher. When she graduated from high school, she wanted to work at a store. She wanted to be a store clerk because they got to wear stockings to work every day and dressed up and stand behind a counter and sell perfume. And Mother thought that if you could do that, you've made it. So she got a job in a 5 and 10 cent type store in downtown Nacogdoches. And she was bringing home her little check every month and living with her mom and daddy, and they were taking care of her and all that. And so one day she heard the door slam, and she looked up, and it was her brother, Walter. And she looked at him so funny, like, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Get your purse." And so she thought something had happened at home. So she runs to the back of the store, gets her purse, and Walter goes in to see her boss. And when he comes back, he gets her and says, "Come with me." So she leaves the store with Walter. And when she thinks they're going to Walter's car to go back home, instead they cross the street and head toward the college. And she looked at him and she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "No sister of mine is going to work in a store. You're getting your degree." And he took her to the registration office there at Stephen F. Austin and signed her up and got her registered for classes. And something else you may not know about her, she had to get a job because they were not rich. They were all real smart. Everybody in Mother's family, I think there were 4 valedictorians in her family of her siblings. She never thought she was as smart as the rest of them, and she was probably, in my opinion, smarter. But she got a job at Stephen F. Austin to help pay. Now, her brothers and sisters paid most of it, but she worked in the lunchroom, the cafeteria is what she did. And I found an old annual on eBay and bought it, and Mother's picture's in it.
Really?
And she's standing behind the counter. I'll get that to you.
You need to take a picture of it
and send it to you. And she's standing behind the counter in that cafeteria, and that's how she worked her way from school, through school, and then she went to work at Leggett. And I wanted to tell you this story about her too. And I've always thought this was so interesting. When she was in elementary school, they had to walk back and forth to school uphill both ways in 10 inches of snow to hear her talk. And and they lived 3 or 4 miles from probably the school. And she would pick up a friend, and by the time they get to school, there'd be 8 or 10 of them. And then as they would walk home, they'd drop off at home, and Mama would be the last one because they lived out on Spanish Bluff Road, and that was far out of Nacogdoches. So anyway, Papa had noticed, and I think my grandmother had noticed, that they were getting home a little bit late in the afternoons from school. And so Papa finally found out what was going on. There was the town bad woman working in a restaurant in downtown Nacogdoches. And the restaurant was in the basement of an old building. So those little girls who were about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, they would walk home, and they would walk through the town and not go the way Papa wanted them to go. They went down the street so they could look in that restaurant and see that bad woman.
That evil woman.
Yeah, evil. She was evil. And so I asked Mama, when Mama was first telling me about this, I said, Mama, what made her evil? And Mama thought for a minute, and she said, well, she smoked. Now, when Mama would say it, she'd whisper, she smoked. And I'd say, okay, what else? Well, she had a boyfriend. And I was like, oh, Lord, that's rough. And I said, what else does she do? Well, she has an apartment. And I thought, oh, okay, that was it, And I said, so y'all would walk by and look at her. And Mama said, yeah, because everybody knew.
Woman.
I said, well, did you ever see her any other time in town? And Mama said, oh, yeah, we'd see her in the stores. And, we'd walking up and down the street. And she said, we'd all just start whispering. And I said, Mom, that breaks my heart. You had some older sisters, and y'all should have invited this town bad woman, because really she wasn't that bad, to go to church. And y'all could have, befriended her. And I said, I bet you didn't even know her name. I said, did you ever find out her name? And Mama said, yep. And she said, and you know her name too. And I thought, well, it scared me at first because I started thinking about my aunts. And I thought, well, they're not bad women. They weren't bad women. And then I got to thinking about all Mama's friends, church friends that she always talked about. And so I thought, well, it couldn't be any of them. And I said, okay, I give up. What's her name? And Mama said, well, her name was Bonnie Parker. And she said, and Clyde Barrel was in jail in Nacogdoches on a petty theft crime. And his mother lived in Nacogdoches, and Bonnie's sister lived in Nacogdoches. And she was working at that restaurant while Clyde was serving his time for whatever transgression he did at that time. And their claim to their terror and fame and infamy, I guess, happened after they left Nacogdoches. So that kind of took me back a little bit. I said, well, I guess it's good that you didn't befriend them. And Mama said, well, why would you think that? And I said, well, either y'all could have brought her up to your standards, and she could have very easily brought y'all down to hers. So it's probably a good thing. But Mother loved telling that story, and I always thought it was so interesting.
I thought that he was in jail for escaping at another jail.
He might have been,
and
but
that's where he cut his toe off to get out of jail.
Was it in Nacogdoches?
Yeah,
Did he cut his toe off?
I think so.
Yeah, he had not done all the bad stuff yet. It was after they left Nacogdoches that they did the bad stuff. But when Mother was sick and she was in her decline, in her last days, I sat next to her. And I talked to her a lot, asked her a lot of questions, and wrote a lot of things down, like how many cars do you remember that we had growing up, and what were the desserts that Dump made at Christmas every year.
Dump cake.
And, her sister was just an awesome cook, Kathleen. And so, and they called her Dump for nobody knows why. But anyway, I asked her all those questions, wrote them all down, and then gave the book to Rosemary, which she needs to give us all a copy of. But when Daddy and Mother married, Daddy was still in the war. We were still in World War II. And so Dad, when the war was over, they hooked back up and moved to Alabama. Well, when they moved to Alabama, Daddy moved her in with Granny and Grandpa, and he said, now, as soon as I can, I'm going to have you an apartment, and we're going to have a place of our own. So Mama said, okay. And she loved Granny and Grandpa, and they loved her, too. She was a school teacher, and they were mightily impressed with that. And so Daddy kept telling her every day, well, I'm going to have an apartment. I'm going to have an apartment. You know, we're going to have an apartment. Well, days went into weeks, and weeks went into months, and they were still living with Granny and Grandpa. And so one day, Daddy got home from work, and I think Daddy's first job was in a cotton mill in Talladega. I think that's the first thing he did. When that,
No,
right
he
after they
was,
married. Right
he
after
was-
they married.
Was that when he was with the Isbell Bank?
No, that came
Well,
later.
It probably was. That was about the only jobs there were in Talladega.
Yeah,
was
I
at
think he was maybe at
Weehawken.
Weehawken. I think that's where he
Yeah.
was, but he didn't work at that one very long. But anyway, one day Daddy got home from work, and Mama had her bags packed and a bus ticket. And he was just floored. She was standing out on the front porch, and he said, what are you doing? She said, you know what? I know you love your family, and I know you're glad to be here with them, but I love my family too. And I'd like to see them. So I tell you what, I'm going back to Nacogdoches. And she had bought the bus ticket. And she said, and when you find us an apartment, you get back in touch with me. And when I have time, I'll come back to Alabama. And Daddy had an apartment the next day.
Well, imagine that.
Yeah. There were times that Mother had to stand her ground.
I remember they lived right there. I remember them telling us about it. I don't remember. I wasn't born then, but right there on South Street.
Yes, on the corner.
You know, and they lived in a basement apartment.
Yes,
there.
they sure did. Yeah. And a woman that lived, that the lady that was that owned the house, you know, I guess the landlord, told Mother that Talladega was ruined because of all of the brides that these soldiers were bringing in from out of state.
Yeah, yeah.
and
That's
really,
never a good idea.
And Mother was like, what? It was so funny, though. But anyway, I remember her telling me about that. And but Daddy found her a place to live. But then she asked her to tell me a story about something that happened at school. I said, tell me a story that's very memorable to you about students. You don't have to call names because Mother was very private about that. She said, okay. She said, when I first started teaching Title I reading, I was in the 7th grade. And 7th and 8th graders took it. And you didn't get tested for it. Every 7th and 8th grader took Title I reading. Well, Mom, and you know, you weren't. It was just for everybody. It should be now because it's really good for kids. But anyway, Mom said that 2 of her students came in, a boy and a girl, and the girl was crying her eyes out, boo-hooing, and the boy had his arm around her, providing comfort.
Yes,
and so the girl was hysterical, and so Mother said, go to the cloakroom. Well, let me tell you something about the cloakroom. I said something about a cloakroom to one of my students the other day, and he looked at me like, what's that? I said, well, tell me what a cloak is. And he said, I don't know. So I had to tell him what a cloak was and what a cloakroom was because, you know, we don't have those anymore.
Why don't you tell us what a cloak is?
It's a coat. And so, anyway, so Mother got them settled in the cloakroom, and she got her students settled in the classroom, and then she went back to the cloakroom to see what was going on. And she said, would y'all please tell me what is wrong? And that boy looked up at her, and he said, Miss Ponder, they have accused her of immortality.
Really?
Yeah. And Mother said it took her probably a good minute or two to compose herself before she could say anything. Because she knew this was serious.
How did her live that long?
That lived that long. And Mother said, look, just give me the names. If you'll give me the names, I can promise you that this will never happen again. And we know that's true because Mother would have handled it. And she said when they started out of the cloakroom, she looked over at the girl, and she called her name, and the girl turned around and looked at her, and she said, honey, I can promise you that none of us are going to live forever. And she said the girl gave her such a strange look when she said that Mama said, I knew then that I had to do vocabulary along with this reading. And she started teaching vocabulary classes. We would get 10 words a week, and we had to learn how to spell it. We had to learn how to use it in a sentence, and we had to know what the definition was. And what you bet, morality and mortality were 2 of the first words that she chose.
Yeah.
Because it just dumbfounded her. She was so
that's
funny.
like the lady that was living by herself in one of the church deacons accused her of fortifications.
Yeah.
They was building forts out there. You know what you call that?
What's that?
It's kind of like the difference in attitude and altitude.
Yeah.
That's a malapropism.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
I used to work with a guy that was the champion.
Yeah.
Malapropism.
Yeah. And I'm surprised Johnny knows the word that long. Did you hear that word?
I
Yeah,
don't know.
now I've got to go home and look it up and write it down.
I don't know how to spell it, but I know.
You know, Mother, as everybody knows, was an outstanding teacher, and she was an outstanding teacher at home. But one kind of, I tell you, we were kind of free range kids. That's the best way to describe it. Mother, honestly, and probably in a lot of cases shouldn't have, gave us credit for having more sense than we probably did have because she had a lot to do. And so she kind of left us out on our own and let us do what we wanted to. But on Wednesday afternoon, I mean, you know, she wanted to make sure we were safe and all that. And she knew we were going to be safe or she'd have killed us. But one afternoon, she had to go, on Wednesday afternoon, they had in-service. Do you remember that? And we'd get a half a day off on Wednesday. And she hated them because she had to wear a girdle. Okay, the teachers had to dress up.
I hate it when I have to do that.
I know it.
Too.
Don't you hate those girdles? Well, she had to wear a girdle, and so she had to dress as she and Clara Parnell and Miss McClellan, Doris McClellan, Miss Hubbard, and they'd have to go to Winterboro.
Miss Parnell and Doris were sisters.
Yes, they were sisters. Yeah. Good folks too.
Yeah.
Great teachers. Well, she. You know, she hated those Wednesday afternoon things, but she had to go to them. And Mama would leave us at home with our Butch in charge. Well, one Wednesday afternoon, I don't know where Butch was. He might have been teaching, but Mama left Johnny in charge with them.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
You know what I told them? I said, we have a rule. Obey all rules.
Yeah, we really obeyed them. Okay, so anyway, Johnny... Mama gave him 70 cents, 7 dimes, and told him to told him to give them to us to buy a snack. You know, that was a little treat that we were going to get. Well, instead of Johnny giving us the dimes like he should have done, he just went to Haines's and bought 7 bags of barbecue potato chips. I hate barbecue potato chips. I have hated them all of my life. You didn't ask. And I'll never forget it. I have not eaten a barbecue potato chip. I don't think I did before that. I know I didn't. And I haven't had one since. I guess I gave them to you. That's why you did it.
Why did you not like them?
I just never have. You don't put barbecue on a potato chip. You put it on meat. You don't put it on a potato chip.
Okay.
And Johnny bought 7 bags of barbecue. It's like T-Bo buying all those bananas. Do you remember when T-Bo went to Haines's and bought a dozen bananas?
That's kind of like when I bought Mama 18 glasses.
Yeah.
For her birthday or something. I don't know why I did that. Like she needed 18 glasses.
Yeah, she didn't need 18 glasses. Well, I don't know. She could have.
I think it comes 18 in a box.
Yeah.
So I just got the whole box. Mr. Haynes gave me a real good deal on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another story I asked her one time. My mother's family dealt with a lot of grief. She had a brother killed in a plane crash, brother killed in a car wreck, a sister who died of cancer, a sister who drowned on in-service day. She had 2 little brothers that died of dysentery. And so I remember when we lost Allison, when Kent's daughter was killed. And I remember walking in the house. We had been to Caraway. They had taken her to Caraway from the accident scene. And I walked in the house and I sat down with her. And she turned around and looked at me. And, you know, my mother was so stoic. And she said, "This is what I remember about growing up."
Wow.
And I thought how sad that was. And so I remember asking her later. I said, I know how my grandmother handled grief. They were all stoic. That whole family was like that. But I said, how did Papa handle grief? Because they really respected my grandfather. And they were terrified of him. They really were, weren't they? I wish we could have known him because we never had the opportunity.
Yeah. He held me when I was real
Did
little.
He would have loved, Johnny would have been right up his alley because that was the kind of person he was. But, I mean, we love you. We don't despise you. You know? And we're not
people scared of me.
We don't fear you. Well, anyway, so I said, Mom, how did Papa handle all of this? You know, these are his children, and he's lost a boatload of them. How did he handle it? And Mama said, well, you know, when Lewis and Edmund died, she said, I had not been born yet. And she said, but I remember the rest of them. And she said, I remember Papa walking the front porch. We had a long front porch, she said. And she said, I would be in bed at night and with windows that all be open. And she said, Papa, I could smell his pipe. And he'd walk the porch just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And she said, and, you know, people would be visiting from the church and preacher would be over there and they'd have to go, you know, the bodies were always brought to the homes and all that. And she said, and then you know what he did when it was over with? And I said, no, what did Papa do when it was over with? All the things, everybody's gone back to work, you know. She said, well, he picked up his tools and went back to work.
Oh, yeah. You know, Mom had a poem that she said was his favorite, and the answer to every problem was work.
Work.
You know, if you're tired, work. If you're grieving,
right.
work. It's just work.
And
work.
that's what you do. And I always thought that was so cool that my grandfather set that example to his kids of how to handle rough things that go on in your life. And he did it without saying anything. He did it by example.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the stories that Mama told me about Papa made me know that she must have been a whole lot like him. You know, because she was so stoic and so no nonsense and and the way she dealt with things. I do have another story I want to tell you if we have time.
Well, yeah, we got time.
We
Go
have
ahead.
time. Okay. Back in the I have to tell this one because Butch told me. And Butch told me, and this is the first time I've heard this. In the 1950s, when Elvis Presley did his first show on the Ed Sullivan Show, Butch got to watch it. And he and Mom and Daddy watched it. We must have been, you was probably so little. Let's see, how would you have been? You know, you might have remembered this. But when the show was over, Butch said, you know, it was a big thing for Elvis Presley to be there. And he was going to be there like 2 weeks in a row. And so when the show was over, Daddy went over to Butch and whispered, when you get to school tomorrow, and Miss Jenkins was Butch's teacher, you go to Miss Jenkins and tell her that your mother was standing in the middle of the floor shaking her leg while Elvis Presley was singing. Now you can only imagine. So Butch was dumb, and he didn't know better. And so when he got to school the next day, he went to Miss Jenkins.
That sounds like Daddy.
He said, it does. He said, when we were watching Elvis Presley last night, my mama was shaking her leg. Well, it just so happened they had a faculty meeting that afternoon, and Miss Jenkins told the whole faculty
Oh, really?
what happened. And Butch said that was the most trouble he had ever been in his life. He said he can't remember ever being yelled at as bad as he was yelled at. And he said, and then when Daddy walked in the door, she lit in on him. She gave him fits about that.
You know, I can remember back in those days, we would go on Thursday afternoon. Mama would keep the car. And we'd go, and Daddy would bring her his check out there when he got his check.
Yes.
And we'd go to Royals, grocery store, Wolf Royal. And she had $15 to spend on groceries. And they were bags full of them. It'd be a bucket full of groceries, $15.
$15. And she knew it down to the penny of how much those groceries were going to cost. And she was, one time, she used to buy 2 loaves of bread. She knew how many pieces of toast we'd eat in the morning and we'd go home for lunch and what sandwiches we'd eat in the afternoon, at lunch. And then we used to have biscuits or cornbread or something at night. So when she bought groceries, she bought 2 large loaves of bread. Well, back then, a large loaf of bread was a yard long. Do you remember those big old long loaves of bread? Well, she would buy 2 of those because she knew that would do her a week. Well, one afternoon we got home from school and she called us all together. I don't know if you remember this. And she wanted to know where the bread was going because we were running out early.
Oh, yeah.
And we were all innocent. We were just like, what?
Especially me.
Yeah, Johnny was like, I hadn't done anything. And so we were like, and so she knew within reason that one of us would have told on the other if we had known, because I'd have told on him in a minute and he'd probably told on me. And so she just could not understand what was going on with the bread because we were only eating one sandwich at lunch and we were eating our toast in the morning. So, she didn't know. So she had one of the front classrooms. Well, she got to watching Tebow, and Tebow was probably about three or four. And Tebow would sit on that front concrete step in front of that old house and watch Doug Harmon park the buses. You remember? And
Well,
how many buses?
That was entertaining, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, how many buses did he park? About five. About five in that front.
There were 4 or 5 parked out front.
Okay.
Mine used to be parked out there.
Every afternoon, Doug Harmon, the last period of the day, would park those buses out in the front, and then they'd have buses on the side. Well, she noticed that Doug, every time he parked the bus, would cross the street, and Tebow would give him something. And she got to wondering what in the world was going on. So when she got home that afternoon, she said, Tebow, what are you giving Doug every afternoon? Tebow said, mayonnaise sandwiches. So every time Doug would park a bus, Tebow would give him mayonnaise sandwiches, and that was where the bread was going.
You know what I thought you were going to tell was
What?
I had a couple of raccoons out there in the cage, and I was feeding them bread. I thought that was what you were fixing to tell.
So you were partially
Yeah,
guilty there.
well, I
too.
don't know if the time would be right or not.
Do you remember Mojo the flying squirrel you
Oh, yeah.
had? Yeah. Yeah, we had everything.
Speaking of grocery,
Oh.
grocery store, tell them the story about her jipping the lady in the grocery store.
Do we have time for that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Mama knew that she had to spend $15 in the grocery store. And every Saturday, me and Rosemary would go to the grocery store with her. And she had $15. Were you with her this day?
I don't know.
I don't know if you was there or not. But anyway, she had $15. So we went to the grocery store, and she bought everything that she normally bought. And me and Butch were talking about it yesterday. She'd buy the A&P brand of toothpaste, and it was liquid. Seriously, it was liquid. Do you remember that stuff? You didn't squeeze it on your toothbrush. It poured on your toothbrush. And she would buy machine cookies. Do you remember Kim talking about the machine cookies? Cheapest cookies she could find, but we'd eat anything, so it was okay. So anyway, she went up and she checked out. And when she checked out, she was like $3 over. And she didn't have the money. And she had bought the exact same thing. And the prices at that time were stamped on the items. So she could not imagine what she had done. And she looked at all of them. And she was very astute when it came to things like that. So she told the girl, she said, I don't know what I've done wrong. And she said, well, you're going to have to take some of these back. Well, one of the boys that was bagging said, Miss Ponder, I'll do it for you. And the girl that was checking her out said, no, you won't. She made the mistake. She takes it back. And was very ugly to our mother. Mm. And so Mother picked out the cookies, the things that she knew we could do without, and she took them back until she got the right amount. We got out to the car. So she gets that receipt and hands it to one of us with a pencil, and she says, we're going through these groceries.
I remember that.
She starts marking off everything.
I must have been with them.
I think you were with us. She starts marking off those groceries. She discovers that at that time there were the old-fashioned, cash registers. Mm. In between every customer, you had to clear the cash register. Well, whoever was ahead of Mother just bought something for $3 and something, and the girl did not clear the cash register. Mm. And so it got added on to Mother's groceries. So when we found the mistake, and we found that $3, and she circled it, Mother said, I'll be back in a minute. When she walked out of that store, that girl was with her. And that girl walked to her car, and she never came back. She lost her job for doing that. And Mother...
Poor lady.
Well, I asked Mother, I said, did you ask to have her fired? When we talked about this later, and Mother said no. But in all honesty, she should have been.
Yeah.
After the way she acted.
Should have looked at it.
She said it really was not right the way she talked to me, and she embarrassed me in front of everybody there. But Mother would have never been the kind that say, I demand that you fire somebody. But no. Mother didn't object, I don't think, when they did. Because that girl was right behind her when they walked out of the store. And Mother did go to the manager and say, this
was
is what
that
happened.
Royal?
It was A&P in Oxford, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because Mama would go to A&P, and then we'd go when they opened Mason's, we'd go to Mason's. Before they had Mason's, we'd go to Rose's in downtown Anniston and go through Rose's back door. I can just smell the popcorn. Do you remember
Well, I wasn't around during all that when they started going to Anniston
Yeah.
and stuff.
Rosemary
we was
and I
always
did that.
Talladega people.
Mama would take me and Rosemary, and she would buy 3 candy bars. And it was back when you could buy those big block candy bars.
Yeah.
She would get chocolate almond, chocolate, and that brickle type chocolate that's kind of chewy and gets in your teeth. All right. She and I and Rosemary would eat on those candy bars while we were shopping. And then when we got home, T-Bo and Jack would meet us at the car, and we'd have to hand them what was left. And Kent, we would have, I've got to tell this story.
And I didn't get none of them.
Well, you were in the woods.
Probably.
I thought about a story. Oh, yeah, I got to tell this story. Mama would get on the phone with Claire Parnell every afternoon after school. Every afternoon after school. And they would talk about the goings on at school. Well, Mama told Clara Parnell that my daddy was going to have surgery. Well, we didn't know that. And it was hemorrhoid surgery.
I remember when he had it.
Okay. Rosemary and I had no idea what a hemorrhoid was. I mean, we didn't know. But we knew that if it was surgical, it had to be really important and bad.
Yeah, or
So
he
the-
wouldn't have done it.
Or the first thing we had to do was go run through Mumford and tell everybody that our daddy was going to have hemorrhoid surgery because we felt like everybody needed to know.
Yeah, of course.
So Rosemary and I were running through Mumford and we were telling everybody about daddy. Everybody was out in the street, went to the grocery store and all that. Well, we met not T-Bo, but Kent. And Kent was coming from the railroad track. They were working on the railroad, and Kent was over there helping them work on the railroad. So Kent was walking from the railroad track, and he met us, and Rosemary said, Kent, Daddy's got to have surgery, and it's hemorrhoids. Well, Kent immediately just crumbles into hysterical tears, which scared me and Rosemary to death because we thought Kent knew what a hemorrhoid was. And that it must have been really bad.
It is bad, ain't it, Randy?
So we all stood there, all 3 of us stood there and just boo-hooed, and then it dawned on us that we still had to tell people that Daddy was going to have hemorrhoid surgery. So we continued our sojourn all through. Well, I'm sure we went to Costner's store, and I'm sure we went up to school, and anybody that was at school, we told everybody. Well, we didn't get in trouble, I guess. I mean, I don't remember getting in trouble for that, even though, and I would have remembered. But anyway, Daddy had his surgery, and Dr. Graves did it, I guess. And he did fine, yeah. But he got one of those round pillows. You remember those round pillows? Donuts. We fought over that thing. Every time Daddy would get up, one of us would sit down on it. We were so fascinated with that donut pillow. And I don't know how long Mama kept it, but we played with it so much as kids. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I remember.
And I remember we sat on it so much and played with it so much that the covering started coming off from it. And
if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't be sitting on it.
And the stuffing up inside of it was coming out.
One time, old Dink Stevens here in Munford had that surgery, and I was in Talladega, and so I said, I'm going to stop by and see old Dink. So when I got up there, he was laying up there just still for the poker, in that bed. He looked around there at me. He said, Johnny, I just found out something. I said, what? He said, did you know that your eyelids are connected to your hemorrhoids? He said, I can't blink my eyes, but it hurt.
I don't remember that part of it. Daddy complaining, or I'm sure he did. I mean, do not get me wrong. I'm sure he did. But I really, don't
It's
remember.
awful. What people have told me, it's awful.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. How could it be good anyway?
Well, Kent had it multiple times.
Yeah.
And Kent Ponder could tell that story better than, any story about hemorrhoids better than any in my life.
Well, there's been a lot of funny ones told about that surgery. Yeah. The funniest what I heard was from a logger that worked for me, and I probably shouldn't tell it, but
Go ahead and tell
no, I don't think I should.
Don't call him
But he was talking about it, how bad he was hurting. He said after that thing, he said that first day, he said he was just hurting like crazy. And they carried him over there and put him in a whirlpool. They had these,
Ooh.
and he said when he got down in that thing, he said it was instant relief. I mean, instant. He said, I was sitting there feeling so good because I'd been hurting for so long. And I'm sitting there listening to him, and he says, then they come to get me out, and they had a towel. Well, they got him out. And when he turned around, there was a bunch of mirrors on the wall there. Said he had a brown ring around his neck, right? Said at first he didn't know what it was. But anyway, there are a lot of funny stories about that. And,
Oh my God, that's rough.
but I can just imagine. You got about all you want to say. What?
I got one more.
Okay.
You want me to do it?
Yes.
Okay. In
Yes.
the beginning of, I'm going to kind of have to read this because I don't know if you know this, but I am also a writer. I'm not published or anything, but I think I'm pretty good. In the beginning
You're
of,
bona fide.
I'm
though.
bona fide.
Okay.
In the beginning of November of 1963, a rumor started around, that around or before December the 31st, aliens from outer space were going to come and kidnap every virgin on the earth. Okay? 16 years old or older. Well, I heard Mama telling Miss Parnell about that because there were girls at Mumford High School that were really upset. Well, Betty Joyce and I had no idea what a virgin was. And we didn't know anybody named Virgin. And so, and we figured, we knew we were safe because we didn't hit the age, And so, it was exciting to tell about and talk about, but I would hide behind the door in my bedroom and listen to Mother and Clara talk about it. Well, one morning, early, like right before Christmas break and before the aliens were supposed to come, Mama was outside hanging out the clothes before we went to school. And it was a real cold day because I remember that the clothes froze on the clothesline when Mama hung them out. And she came back in that morning, though, and there was something wrong with her. And I'd never... Mother was really all the same all the time, and she was very quiet and almost concerned and worried. And I thought, Rosemary and I thought we'd done something, so we got our stuff together real quick and we took off to school so we wouldn't be in trouble. And so that afternoon when Rosemary and I got home from school, Mother wouldn't let us go outside, and she kept us busy for two or 3 weeks. And we were like, what in the world is going on? Well, probably about a week. Well, we were watching the news one night, and this is before the aliens were supposed to come, and they had a story about these weather balloons that had gotten loose up in the atmosphere, and people were seeing these weird colors, and these colors were pulsating. And you would see one over here, and then you'd see one over here, and then you would see one here, and they just pulsated. Well, while Mama was out there hanging out those clothes, she saw them. And for a while there, she wondered
That was amazing.
if that alien rumor, there might have been some truth to it. Because you have to understand, this was in the 1960s, and we didn't know a whole lot back then. And so she thought, well, they're not at the age, but I better keep an eye on them. So she watched us very closely, but when she realized what it was, she relaxed. And guess what? The aliens never did show up.
They didn't.
They didn't come.
No.
And those
You can't
girls,
trust them, aliens.
those girls in Mumford who thought that they were going to be taken up into outer space, missed it.
Missed it.
They missed it.
There used to be an old fella that walked the streets of Talladega. I forgot what his old name was. You could, he seemed normal. Except all you had to do is mention, are they coming back for you? And he'd start looking up and he'd say, soon. They came, he tells the story, they come and picked him up and carried him up there and kept him about a week up there looking at him and everything. Then they'd bring him back, turn him loose. He had to get back on the streets, walking, drinking lilac in the alleyways and stuff like that.
And how do you know he wasn't telling the truth?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, none of us know. Do you know?
But you know, he seemed pretty normal. I mean, he's just a regular old streetwalker guy, and he. But when you said something like that, or just, when's the last time you've been up?
He'd
They're
start
around here
looking.
somewhere. He was just, he was a mess now, I'm telling you. I never did see none of them. But I remember us going out and stargazing at night. You remember Mama knew all those
Yeah.
constellations.
They say it right.
Yeah, something. I don't know how to spell it, but
Yeah.
but you know, I've always had a little bit of a lisp anyway. It's hard for me to say a lot of things. I still can't say aluminum.
I'm gonna say what's that word? I can't say
Twirl.
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 Quarrel.
Coral.
I have to stop and think about those words before I can
Yeah,
say them.
yeah, some of them like that.
Yeah.
I can't say phenomenal.
No.
You talking about something wanting to roll off my tongue. Okay, well, Becky,
What?
I'm sure you're going to think of several other that you need to tell, so we'll just do it again.
Okay.
And a good time to do that would be pretty close to June 1st, because you know what that day is.
It's her birthday.
That's right.
I gave her the best birthday present I could possibly ever give her
What is that?
51 years ago. I'm married and she couldn't wait to get me out of the house.
There's a lot of us got that present.
Y'all still taking
I thought about you yesterday. I went by, day before yesterday, I went by one of our school, and all them old bricks are all piled up.
Well,
right
you got to
there.
get a couple.
If I hadn't have been with somebody else, I'd have got them stopped. I'd have got you some of them.
Well, you need to get a couple.
Well, all right. Well, that's it for this edition of Cheaha Legends podcast, and we'll catch you again next week. All right. We'll see you later.
To Munford our home and all its glory on display, and to the Cheaha legends that'll never fade away.